And we're recording. All systems are go. My name is Andrew Brust. My guest today is William McKnight. I'll introduce him more formally in a moment. And this is Io-Tahoe's Tuesday webinar. Our subject today is data maturity. And that whole notion of maturity and working with some of the newer data technologies, those two things ought to go hand in hand, but maybe they haven't always done so, as some of the newer tools maybe dispense with some of the formalities that existed before them. Maybe discipline has dissipated a bit, but we're going to talk about bringing that discipline in and still having the agility of working with some of the newer tools around big data, data lakes, and so forth. So now what we'll do is go ahead and tell you about ourselves. I'll tell you a little bit about William, but then I'm going to ask him to chime in if he would. He's the president of McKnight Consulting Group. He is an analyst. That's an important thing right then and there, because once upon a time I was a research director, and William was one of the star analysts on our team of data analysts. And so it's great to have him as a guest now. We've known each other for years, but I'm not entirely sure, actually, William, that we've ever met in person. He's also an author, he's a speaker, and not just a talking head. He's someone who has held executive positions around data initiatives at IBM, at Visa International, and at Anthem Health as well. William, besides that boilerplate stuff, anything else you want to tell us? Please chime in.
I think we might have been on a panel together back when we were younger. But okay. I appreciate you bringing out the fact that I do work on the analyst side, of course, as well as the consulting side. I think they feed each other quite well. So it's things I learn, from the analyst side of things that I bring to my consulting, and I bring a little real world back into my analyst work, because, from the consulting work that I do, and trying to, make this all happen in the real world. So it's a balance, and I have learned that really a lot of what I do is about data maturity, no matter what we call it, whether I'm doing an assessment of an organization or speccing a project in detail, or, preparing a multi-year data strategy for an organization. I think the more you can raise the data maturity of an organization, the more you can raise the business, because so many business initiatives are tied to it. And I know we'll get into that, but I'm just really excited about this topic today.
Excellent. And I agree with you about the consulting work and the analyst work informing each other. It's actually a pretty rare combination. Most analysts are focused on being analysts and don't kind of recharge their batteries by going back to the field and working with customers. Those that do, I think, end up with sharper analysis and stay on their toes. So, good stuff. And as for me, I'm your kindly host. My name's Andrew Brust. I wear a number of hats. One of them is around covering big data and analytics for ZDNet. Along with a couple of my colleagues, Tony Baer and George Anadiotis, we together work on a blog called Big on Data, and that keeps me pretty abreast of what everyone's doing. But I also have individual clients, and probably right now one of the most important is Io-Tahoe, market strategy, market intelligence, and helping Io-Tahoe achieve more visibility and more mind share, and that's what these webinars are all about. And I've been working in various facets of data, BI going back to the late 90s, I guess big data going back, obviously not that far, going back to maybe 2011, and even things like old-fashioned disk-based databases that ran on individual PCs like DBase2 going all the way back to 1985. That's probably enough nostalgia, and so maybe we can move on to the topic at hand, and maybe we can frame the question a little bit. And let me make clear that although I'm the one maybe articulating the points on this slide, in a discussion with William, That's where this wisdom was extracted from. So most business initiatives today, whether they're labeled as data initiatives or insight initiatives or AI initiatives or not, tend to be, from William's point of view, and I would agree, somewhere between 70 and 80% focused on data. And yet, and I alluded to this in the introduction, especially because of newer tools that work around the notion of self-service and work around the notion of less structured data, there's less formality in this world than maybe there once was, and even back then, maybe we could have used a little bit more at times. So most businesses actually kind of lack the literacy and the maturity to keep that data in tip-top shape so that those initiatives can be most successful. And we're not going to just use terms without defining them. We're going to drill down and we're going to talk about what maturity is. William, do you have anything to add to the framing of the question, or if not, I'll just unbridled. I'll move on.
Well, I mean, this is my quote, and I definitely stand behind it. I have learned that in the assessment work that we do with organizations all over the world, mostly big to mid-sized organizations, having us look at their data, that in years past, okay, we spec data warehouses and master data management hubs and Hadoop for big data and so forth. And there was really a lot of attention needed in those areas, and there still is. But I have learned that organizations, a lot of them they're in quicksand. They're really paralyzed by the fact that the initiatives that will set them apart today from the competition and allow them to be competitive, they have this much to do with data. 70-80% of budget, 70-80% of energy will go in this arena. I think there's a gap between this reality and the acknowledgement of this reality, and that's what I like to fill. Is I like to bring some championing of data to organizations so that they realize that data is a true asset that supports the business in the entirety, including all the initiatives that are important to the business today. And so therefore, it should be taken care of in a certain way, in a certain efficient way, with great practices and as a tier in the architecture, and be attended to with leverage, meaning things like data warehouses and MDM hubs. I know I keep coming back to these things, but even your analytical databases otherwise and so on. And I know we'll get into some of this, but there's a lot of artifacts that can be built to a high standard that not only support one application, but will support many. And I find organizations tend to stay away from doing things right because they think it's going to take a lot longer. Well, it may take a lot longer if you don't have good data expertise aboard. So that is something that organizations need to build and grow. It's data expertise, because that will take them so far, so fast, and allow them to be the efficient machine that they really need to become in 2018.
Awesome. So I'm glad I kind of solicited some of your input, even at this framing point of the discussion, because I think a lot of people kind of do look at the hygiene of their data as, well, not unimportant, but they look at it as kind of a prerequisite and not much more. And I think what you're saying is everybody should really get into that, because that's going to give you, first of all, it's going to give you efficacy as you move forward, but second of all, it's probably going to put some fire in your belly and give you some confidence that your data initiatives or your business initiatives that are data-based will be successful. I think a lot of people kind of have a sinking feeling in their stomachs maybe that the chance of success is maybe a little bit muted, and it doesn't have to be that way. People can be optimistic. So let's actually kind of talk about what some of the different components are in this whole chain that creates data maturity. And we're talking about technology components here first. So 3 of them mentioned here, and one of them is data warehouse. And well, I'll come back to that in just a second, because it's interesting to start with that one. Master data management, that's what MDM stands for, a master data management hub, and of course the all-important, nowadays, data lake. Now, if we're going to start with the data warehouse, William, gosh, there may be some contrarians out there, or maybe you're the contrarian, and there would be some people out there who would say, well, isn't that yesterday's technology, or last year's, or last decade's? It's based on all kinds of notions that have been around since the 70s, and I thought we moved kind of past that. I know that you wouldn't agree with that, but maybe you could go into some of the reasons why the warehouse is so important even today.
Absolutely. Well, first of all, I make no apologies about the fact that we're talking about real technical artifacts here when we're talking about data maturity. Some people might think, well, you got to talk about capabilities. You know, we have to have this, that, and the other capabilities. But I say, well, how do you enable those capabilities? You do it by having the things that we're talking about here. And there's not 100 ways to get there efficiently. These are the ways to get there efficiently. And that's what I'm really gearing my channel of data maturity towards. Well, you do need a data warehouse. You do need these other things. But you asked about the data warehouse, so let's talk about it. You know, I come into organizations to look at big data, to look at MDM, yes, and to look at data warehousing, of course. And it seems that no matter why I'm brought in, as long as I'm allowed to snoop around, and I really love being able to do that, I find that some budget thrown effectively towards the data warehouse probably will go further than budget thrown anywhere else in the data landscape. Now, I'm not saying don't do all those other things. Of course, do them. But at the same time, I don't know of anybody that's maximized their data warehouse, meaning it has all of the analytical data. It has it all at a high standard of quality. We have user groups across the organization that love it and are doing self-service of that data with high performance and high management and high availability, and it's truly scalable and all this. Now, you need that efficient artifact in the landscape. You do need other things today, for sure, besides the data warehouse, even on the analytical side. The data warehouse, now I'm going to go a little contrary, okay? The data warehouse has become that, I like to say, the least common denominator, meaning that you have 10, 20 constituency groups in the data warehouse. And when I'm working in these organizations, that means it's a really high bar to make changes to that data warehouse that will empower it for the next decade. Meaning I might want to turn that data warehouse columnar. I might want to put certain components of that data warehouse into in-memory storage. I might want to do some of these things. I might want some workloads that are in the data warehouse not to be there, as a matter of fact. I might want them somewhere else, on some higher performance machine, like maybe an in-memory database, maybe a GPU database, something like that. Maybe it belongs in Spark. There are workloads in the data warehouse that don't belong there, but more organizations have the opposite problem. They don't have enough leveraging the data warehouse because the warehouse wasn't built to a standard where it's come one, come all, and we have a program for including you and this sort of thing. So the data warehouse remains important.
William, that was my question. I mean, I think the attraction towards some of the newer technologies is that maybe the barrier to entry of getting the data out there is lower. With the warehouse, I mean, it's a highly governed, I'll use the word regulated environment, and there needs to be agreement on all parties, really, that the data in there, first of all, is appropriate to have in there, and second of all, it's been vetted for accuracy and so forth. And that's, maybe to some people that's been a bit of a blocker, but what I think I hear you saying is that really maybe people should think in terms of layers. There's going to be foundational data that's going to apply to so many different business scenarios, and that ought to be in the warehouse, and that ought to be kind of deliberated carefully. And then other data that's more, transient in importance, maybe that goes in a data lake, and then maybe there's a strategy to kind of get these things together, which is a little bit of a call ahead to some other stuff that we're going to talk about. But is that kind of notion of layer or tiers a valid one, do you think?
Yeah, that's completely fair, and it's incumbent upon all true data professionals to know what all the options are so that they put the workloads into the right platform to succeed, one of which is the data warehouse. And so remediation of data warehousing is very important. So, I mean, I agree with all these companies that might be talking to you and saying the data warehouse is an ancient artifact and so on. Maybe it is in their company, but that doesn't mean that they don't need a data warehouse. That maybe they put it on an old vanilla Oracle or vanilla DB2 or a SQL Server, something that's not quite right for where it has grown to and what it's trying to do today. And so maybe therein lies some of the black eye, I guess, that data warehousing might be getting in that organization.
That makes sense. So I think what you're saying also is there may be connotations with the data warehouse that are based on historical patterns, and people maybe ought to rethink those. And I guess that's borne out by the fact that if you look at Amazon web services and all of the data services within that universe of stuff, that its Redshift data warehouse has been one of its most popular services to date, and also an independent company called Snowflake Computing that has a cloud data warehouse solution. They've been kind of a darling of the industry and just closed on a huge funding round, a Series E round. So I guess I was being a little disingenuous when I said, data warehouses are old-fashioned, because there's some newfangled services that are extremely successful using the warehouse paradigm. So let's talk about the other two things on this slide, though. I'll kind of call out to the audience. We have a whole slide just on master data management, so maybe we don't have to drill down that hard here. But let's talk about. Can you kind of introduce what MDM actually is, and maybe your opinion about how universally it's been implemented and valued, or not?
Well, I don't think it's been valued enough. It provides so much value to so many organizations, yet it has seen such a slow uptake over the years. It's very surprising. But now we're seeing a real resurgence of MDM interest and implementations. And what it is there's so many aspects to it. But at the core, it's saying I'm going to master the important data of the organization, not the high quantity data, but the high quality data, maybe our customer list, our product list, our store list, some of our reference data, and beyond that, every organization can spawn off another good 10 subject areas based upon its unique needs. But to master this once and use it many, many times throughout the organization is extremely efficient. And that's what an MDM hub is to me. It's an efficient way to master that data. It doesn't provide ROI necessarily, it provides TCO because it supports so many of the other applications. So you got to build it in a way that you get that data governance input. I know we're going to talk about that, but you get that data governance input so you know it's solid, what you're putting in there, the business rules, data quality rules, and so on. And you have to have a way to distribute that data and map it to the various schemas that are necessary. But also the hub itself becomes a place where or applications and users can come and self-serve their data right out of there if that's all they need. Or they might virtualize it with some other artifacts that are in place, like the data warehouse or a data lake or something like that. So I think there's just tremendous value to the MDM hub, and the industry is beginning to notice.
Excellent. And, I kind of noticed MDM was gaining a certain amount of momentum in the BI world, and then the big data, phenomenon happened, and, most people didn't even know how to spell MDM. But now I feel like the newer generation of technology is bringing new relevance to MDM. I'll also point out that it's a tool not just for database work and analysis. It also ends up being a really important tool for application development, because there are lots and lots of data elements that come up, from in almost every single custom developed application in an enterprise. And to have to reinvent those tables all the time, first of all, that's a lot of effort, and second of all, it's a dangerous thing if everybody has a slightly different version of what all the products are, what all the customers are, and so forth. So having a central repository for that stuff benefits, computing pretty much everywhere in the enterprise. Yep. So data lakes. Let's talk about what a data lake is. I went to in September. I went to the Strata conference here in New York. I say here because I'm in New York. You're in Texas, but And I was struck by the fact that almost nobody was talking about Hadoop. I referred to it as the H word because nobody was really saying it. And it's hilarious because, at one time that conference was called Strata plus Hadoop World. Yeah. And, now it's just Strata Data Conference. And so Hadoop was somewhat eclipsed by Spark, but really neither one of those were mentioned. What was really mentioned was the phrase data lake. That seems to have become the preferred term as a catch-all maybe for both of those, for data repositories set up on both of those distributed data, execution engines. But I don't know. What does data lake mean to you? And also, even though it's all the way on the bottom right here, I'm really keen to hear how you think cloud and cloud storage enters into this as well.
Yeah, well, as time goes on here, all these things that have a lot of value to data are just going to get an increased footprint in the organization. And data lake is one of them. And they're definitely in our reference architectures for good reason. Many of our clients are, they have data scientists. And data scientists want unabated access to hordes and hordes of information. They're not the pedestrian end user, and I don't mean that in a negative connotation, but they're not the end user we're used to, like for a data warehouse, where, like you said before, you have to have that structured data, you have to have that caretaking around it, and so forth. The data scientists, oftentimes, if I'm supporting one, I can't even articulate very well what it is they're doing with the data, and that's okay because there's only a handful of them, and they know what they need. And so right now, the motto is support your data scientists. You got to do more with your data warehouse end users. You got to spark them. You've got to draw out their business goals and make connections from data to that. But with the data scientists that I've worked with anyway, they want unabated access to that data. But the lake also serves a dual purpose in not only supporting scientists, but it's also a great staging area for the data warehouse and other things potentially. And it's also a place where I'm going to drop a copy of my MDM data, for example, so that the scientists have it there to use and so on. Anyway, I'm probably drawing a big old complex mental picture here of a reference architecture, but frankly, they are getting a little more complex, okay? And I encourage everyone out there to have their go-to reference architecture for what they're targeting it to look like in 5 to 10 years. But you mentioned Hadoop. Yes, there seems to be a consensus that we're all de-emphasizing Hadoop and so on, but what are most data lakes going to be on? In my view, it's Hadoop. And so I really don't understand this, why we're afraid to say the H word, anymore. Because you have, companies that have gone public on the basis of this. It is still strong in organizations. It or some form of it, as it matures, will remain strong in organizations because it serves a very important purpose of capturing that analytical, unstructured big data. And it allows access to all these tools for that purpose. And so I see a lake providing that dual purpose, siphoning off ETL cycles off the data warehouse. That's important to a lot of people as well. But also, supporting your data scientists.
And let me just kind of redirect you to comment on what role cloud and cloud storage is playing in the data lake world.
Oh, yeah. Well, when I said, it's Hadoop, let me put an asterisk by that. I'm glad you are reminding me of this very important dilemma that organizations, I shouldn't say dilemma, opportunity, I guess, that organizations have today with cloud storage like S3, okay? There's a definite alternative to Hadoop that has emerged around S3 and other forms of, just pure cloud storage, right? So Hadoop was the thing, 5-10 years ago when we wanted an alternative to relational databases. We happen to have more. Now, again, I don't think that having more dilutes Hadoop's importance in organizations. It's all about that rising tide of supporting data. I know organizations, so sometimes are going to be limited by what things they can take on, and they may decide on HDFS, or they might decide on S3 for their cloud storage, for their data lake and other application backbones for various analytical workloads. But S3, it's going to be more scalable, more persistent, in case you're interested in that. S3 is probably going to be more available. That's a little debatable. Amazon's going to do more for S3, for example, by backing it up and doing some of those administrative functions. But HDFS remains my go-to for a data lake without extraneous information, because it has much better performance, 2 to 3 times, I would say, better performance on the query side of things. It also supports Parquet and ORC formats that I may want in that data lake. The columnar way might be good for the scientist profile. And furthermore, S3 has some size limits that you have to sometimes, if you have true big data, you got to work around. And so that can be difficult as well. So I think Hadoop remains important for the data lake, but I think it's definitely on the table, something like S3 for your data lake. Andrew?
I am here. Sorry about that.
Okay.
I'll also just mention that on the Azure side, there's Azure Blob Storage, which is roughly equivalent to S3, but there's also this thing called Azure Data Lake Store that's built on top of the Blob Storage, and the Data Lake Store actually gets rid of file size limitations, among other things. Both of them, though, and S3 as well, the data in those stores can actually be queried from SQL. On the Amazon side, there's a product called Athena, and on the Microsoft side, there's something called Azure Data Lake Azure Data Lake Analytics, which has a SQL dialect called USQL that can be used to query the data. And if anything, I think what's emerging as a definition of a data lake is that it's really about having data stored in a flat file format or some native format, maybe brought into Hive, but oftentimes Hive can just treat a standalone file as a table. But that's the idea: is you can put stuff that's more raw, but you can still query it and you can still work with it. And I'll also just say that at this point, there's enough kind of emulation layers to make cloud storage look like Hadoop distributed file system, such that I wonder if we're kind of splitting hairs now to talk about, which is the standard, because really it's all about, having a big storage volume where files in various native formats can be placed and queried. So let's drill down a little further, if we can, and talk about the governance process. And on the one hand, I'm tempted when people ask me, well, what is data governance? I start thinking of products, quite honestly. There are a number of products in the data catalog space. There are products in and open source technologies as well in the role-based access control and security space. There are data protection applications. In fact, there's the product from Io-Tahoe, which does data discovery work on all of your data sets and databases. So, I'm tempted to think of that as governance. Like, get those products in, learn what they are, get them in, implement them, and you've got governance. But, in talking to you, you kind of set me straight that, yes, you need those tools. But really what governance is about is correlating your data, the taxonomies for it, the schemas for it, the access to it, and correlating that with the business itself. So all the way on the right of the slide, that's the punchline here. You've got to think about the different business roles for the different personas and different individual people in your business. There's going to be business rules that are unique to your company. There's going to be data quality rules that go with that, and also standards and so forth around around where that data comes from, and I guess maybe around vetting it as well. So hopefully, that's the punchline. Hopefully I didn't step on it too much, and I've just set you up to maybe cast a little more light on what that business input is about, and how that kind of enters the process of working on engagements with your consulting clients.
Well, absolutely. I think you got it. From my perspective, it is about what it's going to do to the bottom line. I mean, if you're spending corporate money on things like data governance, things that are potentially abstracted from the bottom line, you have to draw the connection points. If you're going to treat data governance like something that, it's just part of the lights being on, you better show how it impacts various applications that actually are trying to drive to the bottom line of the business. And the same might be true for your MDM hub and other things like that, right? They're very intertwined. So I think that's what I like to say about data governance. I want to make it actionable. I want to make sure that the applications that are out there, that we're supporting them, and that they like what we're doing, and that we're making them more efficient. And we're making them more effective, too, by having the catalog, having glossaries, and things like that. Having the architecture, I would add. Having the security mechanisms in place. I hate it when the poor, application owner is scrambling. Well, how do I now do data security? Let's help them. Let's help them with things from the data governance side of things. How about GDPR? Does everybody in the organization have to figure that out? Or can we do something from the data governance perspective to support all these applications going forward? I think they have to go through a GDPR review now, and I think that the data governance can be a real strong conduit for that.
And I'll just point out, because my other job is being an acronym policeman, that GDPR stands for the General Data Protection Regulation of the European Union. It's going to kick in full force in May of this year. And it affects all companies, regardless of where the company is located. As long as they have customers in Europe, then the GDPR applies. And it has pretty stringent regulations around how data is managed, and the notion also of removing data correlated with the right to be forgotten. This is serious business, and if you don't have governance on your data, you're almost definitely not going to have compliance with GDPR. I'll also kind of bring in here the last point on this slide, which is that there are a lot of governance tools now that are using AI and machine learning to automate lots of things. In fact, Io-Tahoe does that. And we do it for good reason, because if you don't automate some of the grunt work here, you're never really going to finish the whole process of doing data discovery on all of your data everywhere. But automation in and of itself is not sufficient. And everything you've talked about with respect to getting business input in this whole process still applies, whether you're using automated tools or manual tools. And I imagine also there's kind of the psychological and social effect of getting buy-in on the projects if you're bringing the business in to get the governance infrastructure in place. So you didn't say that, but I'm just going to guess, and I'll stand corrected if you tell me that's not true.
Well, definitely, it's a business side function. I want them to do it, but oftentimes they don't know how to go about doing it, right? So we need to set the table for that. It's just not an excuse to say, well, they didn't do it. They on the business side didn't do it. If we have knowledge about things and how they need to be done, we need to present that, and we need to present it in a way that helps everybody see what's in it for their particular objectives. And let's hope that all the objectives roll up to the overall corporate objectives, and they usually do at some level. So I trust that process, and I want to empower organizations with everything I possibly can, and I think that's incumbent upon every data professional. And there's so much going on in this space. I mean, look at all the things we're covering in just this little webinar. There's a lot to know.
There absolutely is, and one of them again is master data management. I feel like we've given this some good airtime, some good coverage. But let's just reiterate what this is about. is having standardized lists of the entities that are data entities and also business entities that come up again and again in both operational context and in analytical context. So, I listed a few canonical examples here, like customers and products and, or part numbers and locations. You want to make sure those things are standardized, and that's what MDM does. Without it, as the slide says, you're gonna have lists of those things that are similar but not identical. That can lead to a real rough time in doing accurate analytics and drilling down on things, because if not everything is classified in a conformed way, then you may end up getting results that look a little funky. With it, you're going to end up having a common sort of context and viewpoint on the entities as they exist operationally and the categories as they exist, for dimensional analysis or even for building machine learning models, right? A lot of those things maybe come in when you're doing feature engineering and that sort of thing. Actually, that brings up a question I had, which is how much of what you're doing now is really in support of AI and machine learning initiatives as opposed to, just analytics and dashboards?
Well, let me just add something on MDM first real
Sure.
quick for everybody, because it's important. And that is that MDM's not just about the data, but it's about the process by which that master data gets built. And there are workflow processes in place within the MDM software that is usually, not always, but usually utilized to create, edit, update, delete that master data. So that's as important as the data itself, and probably where a lot of the energy goes in those projects. Now, you ask about AI, and I would say that that's something that's very much emerging, very much being talked about. Definitely, we're putting that into our strategies. We're helping organizations strategize around AI and ML because, frankly, it's all about the data. This is another one of those things that's about the data. When you have the data, you have great algorithms. And when you have great algorithms, obviously you're making great decisions in an automated fashion and incorporating a lot of variables. But you have to have the data first. And so here's what I say about this, that you have to be a certain level of maturity. Speaking of maturity, you have to be a certain level of data maturity to be ready for AI. And this doesn't mean the highest out there, but it does mean that there's some standard. You must have a data warehouse. You must have that ship in order. You need data governance, all right? You need some of these things around data. You might need MDM, for example. You might need organizational change management because these data initiatives really do impact the organization in so many different ways. But that being a given, we all need to get to artificial intelligence. It's definitely a game changer. It's definitely something that has the potential for being the next really big revolution in terms of how life, goes about. So this is something that organizations need to embrace in their product set and in the ways that they go about their business. And there's so many, different avenues for that. We can get into it, but data is at the core of artificial intelligence. If you are not already collecting all data, begin to collect all data. If you are not already obtaining data from syndicated sources and third-party sources, begin to explore that minefield and figure out what data might be interesting to you. I have restaurant clients, for example, that are interested in weather because if you add that into your artificial intelligence algorithms, it greatly enhances the efficacy of the algorithm in terms of predicting exactly what food is and drink is going to be sold exactly at what time on exactly the day, right?
Wow.
So, and that is I talk to my clients, if they can predict the future, they can do it all. If they can predict the future, they can get in front of the future and they can transform that future into what they need. So that prediction ability is what we need to begin to be giving our organizations. And AI, to me, is the only way to really get there with any high level of quality.
That makes a lot of sense. And also, I'll point out that the data side of the business at the Weather Channel was acquired a couple of years ago by IBM.
Right.
So the importance of weather data, for example, in the context you just brought up, it can't really be overstated. If if we have a company focused on data and software, actually acquiring a company focused just on the weather.
Yeah.
All right, so we've talked about components. Now I think it makes sense to also just talk about things architecturally, and also the notion of there being lots of, different places to put your data. You probably shouldn't overdo that, but there are good reasons to put different data in different places, yet you still need a way to bring things to bear and bring things together when it comes time to actually work with the data. So on the architecture side, I've just, with your help, of course, listed out some of the options that exist today. We've already talked about data warehouses and data lakes. I'm not even repeating that here. There's also data marts, which I guess we could think of as kind of departmental data warehouses, but you can correct that rather simplistic notion if you'd like. We've got streaming data platforms. You did mention columnar before. That's the notion that data, instead of storing all the data in a row together, you store all the data in a given column together, because oftentimes when we're doing analysis, we're doing it on one or two columns, and if all the data for those columns are stored together, we can do that a lot more efficiently. Graphics processing units, GPUs, really they're not about graphics anymore. Really they're about AI, and they're about massively kind of parallel operations within a single server rather than across a cluster of servers, massively parallel operations within a server to deal with data. NoSQL databases are all about data where the structure, rather than being in rows and columns, may use some other notion, key value pairs or so-called column families, or graph databases where you've got nodes and edges and you're really looking at relationships. So that's kind of an overwhelming array of stuff, William. What do you do? I just want to run back to my data warehouse and put everything there because at least I understand it, but maybe you can help me be more open-minded.
Well, if you did that, you might have a challenge with performance and scalability and everything else, frankly. So the real premise of our architectures, I think the premise of good architecture today, this is where we are today, all right? It's availing yourself of what's out there and putting workloads into the best place possible to succeed. Now, we can talk about dividing up a workload, but getting past that, what does it mean to succeed? Number one, it means performance. Number two, it means scalability. Number three, it means provisioning. This is what my clients tell me that they need out of their workloads. And there are other things as well, but they're more drag-alongs. So let's start with performance. Get things into the best place possible for it to achieve the level of performance that it might ever need. And today it means some of the things you're showing there. But you know what? This is not some mutually exclusive list at all. I mean, there are columnar in-memory databases in the cloud that use GPUs, there's every combination possible of all these paradigms out there going. And I think it would be foolish for anyone to sit here and say they know it all, right? We're just doing the best with what's available. We're trying not to put things on the table that haven't proven themselves or won't have merit. We're trying not to put things on the table at an organization that's not ready to handle it. And I think we all need to every organization needs to get to the place where they can handle a lot, where they can handle new technologies, where they have a little R&D maybe going, where they have expertise across the board and all the things we're talking about and so on, so that they can absorb new things as they come available. And they can be that quote-unquote type A organization. I think those are the organizations that are going to succeed because they're going to avail themselves of data mart, streaming, columnar, GPU, NoSQL. How about NewSQL? How about graph databases? How about in-memory databases, data lakes, etc.? They all have merit today. Now, some people say, well, William, in the future, we won't need all these things, right? We'll have it all figured out, and there'll be 2 or 3 things. And I agree, but we have to make decisions based upon today and being competitive for the next 3 to 5 years, right? We can't say, okay, we're going to wait it out. That's not a good strategy. We're going to wait it out and see what shakes out, because it's a moving target. It always is. And you're not going to jump, speaking of maturity, you're not going to jump from a 1 to a 5 suddenly. You got to take your paces through 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. So if you're sitting there as an organization at data maturity of level 1, you better get moving towards level 2, because guess what? Next year, the level 3 is going to look different than it does this year. Next year, level 3 might have some AI in it. And there you're going to see, you're just going to get pushed down if you're not moving forward. So that's how important data is, and all these things are important.
All right. Well, maybe to allay some of my concerns, we have a couple of weapons in our arsenal, right? If the data is kind of distributed amongst different across different repositories, well, I've got data integration, which enables me to kind of bring data together, maybe in a smaller number of repositories. I also now, and this is maybe growing, I have this notion of data virtualization. And, you know, really what that ends up being about is being able to bring data together in queries without necessarily needing to physically import it into, you know, whatever database is kind of our main focus. We should have a way, and that's why we use the word federation, to bring things together even as we achieve a balance and respect the notion that some data will fit better on certain repository technologies than others. So, and maybe we're reaching a crescendo here. I have a concern about siloing data. If we have different data in different places using different technology stacks, I worry about kind of the personnel needs and the talent needs around maintaining that kind of heterogeneous environment. I worry that it might make the data less discoverable and therefore impede self-service. And I also just wonder that both of those things, if both of those things won't kind of combine to make the notion of, you know, getting insights from the data and being a data-driven organization more elusive. But maybe what we can get is to a kind of nirvana where we understand that it's not about putting everything in one place, or, you know, some notion that by putting things in different places it's going to be fragmented. The idea really is to hit kind of a balance and to bring those different stores together in a coordinated way. Maybe I can let you read some of the some of the punchline points on the right slide and also comment on everything, if that's okay.
Oh yeah. I mean, I know in talking with you, Andrew, in the past, that you might be a little bit more skeptical about the virtualization than I am, and that's great. And just to put it out there, I'm not saying virtualize everything, and I'm not saying it's okay if every query that you write has to go and get data from 10 different data sources, and in, you know, a data warehouse here, a data lake there, maybe Azure here, and, you know, some other Google Cloud over here. You know, no, it's not okay. That's not okay, and that's not what I'm saying. I'm saying physical cohabitation is going to give you the best performance. However, I'm also saying that every organization has those queries that don't have that kind of performance requirements, and that might have some light virtualization that would make it happen. And maybe that is a way forward while you think about the longer term architecture implications of physically cohabitating the data. So we all have those queries. I think it's important, if you embrace what I'm saying here about heterogeneity in architecture as being a sign of maturity, if you embrace that notion, then you're going to need some virtualization, because you're going to have those edge queries that fall through the cracks. And frankly, you're going to have a lot of queries that you just want to put to virtualization anyway. Why not? You cannot put all data everywhere, right? So you're going to have data that you put in the best place to succeed, maybe the first two best places to succeed, and that's it. And you go from there. See, what I'm trying to leave in the picture, which must be left in the picture, is good judgment over this, right? I'm not trying to take away, and I know you're not either, nobody is really, I'm not trying to take away anybody's judgment. You have to think about these things and understand the ramifications. But if I can put more options, and if I can put more of the potential long-term ramifications of the decisions on the table, then I'm doing my job. And if I'm bringing to bear what other organizations are doing, what all the possibilities are, et cetera, then I'm doing my job. And that's what I try to do, is really put decisions on the table so that the great judgment that we already have can go to work, and we can get the best data architecture. And obviously, it's not a one and done. We have to keep attention to architecture over time.
Sure. I think that notion of being judicious as we go through things, I just feel like in technology wave after technology wave after technology wave, it comes down to that. If for no other reason than there's so many waves that there's an importance of being skeptical. There's an importance to skepticism around looking at all of them. But in general, no matter how much a technology promises to, sort of make judgment and curation sort of obsolete, it still seems to serve everything really well when human intelligence is brought to bear. I just want to reinforce a notion here. This idea that by coordinating we can coordinate relational data sources and data lakes, that ends up tying into a very important facet of the Io-Tahoe product, which, as the slide will tell you, was named we were named a cool vendor in data management this past year. And a big important part of our mission is to find relationships between different tables and data sets, and we do that not just by looking at schema, but in fact, really we focus on going beyond the schema, because we know there's going to be, either for reasons of incompleteness or reasons of just not lack of awareness, that some relationships just won't be portrayed that way. So our software, our product, uses machine learning to go through and find those relationships. And it finds those relationships, of course it finds them within databases, but it also finds them between databases and between databases and data lakes, and even between multiple data lakes. So this notion of federation, this idea around having different repositories being appropriate for different data, but still needing to be able to coordinate and coalesce the data when it comes time to do analysis and build machine learning models, that is our whole raison d'etre, really, is to make sure that that process can be carried out with confidence and in a way that's comprehensive. So, the company hosting the webinar always needs to tell you a little bit about their product, and this really is where I think it was most germane to do so. We have just a few minutes left, William. If you had, kind of any closing thoughts, now would be the time, because we're sort of at the end of our material here.
Well, I would say if for the environments out there that have everything fully documented, and they know where everything is, and there's no grist between end users and their data, self-serving their way to their data. When you want to make architectural changes, it's easy. I don't think they need Io-Tahoe. But for the rest of us, which is practically everybody, I think it's a great tool. And I look forward to using it in real production at my clients and discovering quickly what's going on there, so that we can make those heads-up decisions that I was talking about before, with every piece of information on the table at our disposal. And really, there's only one way to go about doing it. You cannot expect people to go hunt and peck and figure this stuff out. I, as an architect going into environments, I love documentation, but it's seldom there. So stuff like this will bring me closer to actual knowledge of what's going on, so that I can inch that thing forward into the reference architecture that we really want to have. And I think that's an important notion maybe to leave on, which is, again, you're not going to jump maturity. You have to work with what you have. Nobody's going to say, okay, shut down my application because it's not in the right architecture, and then, bring me back up in 6 to 12 months. It's no, you have to decide, does that stay? Does that go? Does that get isolated? How do we do this thing? How do we get to our architecture? And it's going to be stepwise.
All of that makes sense, and I'll just point out that even if everything is documented, the very nature of the way data is going these days, with the growing volumes, the growing repositories, and just the way that data lakes work, is that there are going to be kind of organic relationships between the data that were just impossible to kind of forecast or foretell. So, and I know you were being kind of kind and saying pretty much everybody's in the square of not having everything documented. And I would just selfishly point out that even for those who do feel it's all documented, there's going to be more stuff to discover. You know what? It's a little bit like on a social network when you know all your friends, and then it turns out your friends. You may have one friend from one part of your life and another friend from another part, and they actually know each other. That's the kind of stuff that you can't really document. You need to discover it, and that's why we call it smart data discovery. And with that, we'll put up a thank you slide. We'll thank our audience for participating in this, and William, I'd really like to thank you for participating in this, because I think it was a lively and fun conversation, and we took some things that I think people tend to think of as dry subjects, and your passion really kind of brought them to life. It's not about the technical rigors of it necessarily. It's about the whole connection between the business and the data, which is what makes the data accurate and relevant and important.
Well, thank you, Andrew. I enjoyed it.
All right, awesome. Thanks to everyone. Have a good morning, evening, or afternoon, depending on what part of the globe you're joining us from. This is Andrew Brust for Io-Tahoe, and we'll see you again in 2 weeks. Thanks, everyone.